You wanted real talk, and this is where you'll hear it. Uninhibited by the toxic influences of cancel culture, unvarnished and unfettered, unencumbered by the censorship of traditional radio, uncontaminated by big media interests.
And now, Sherman Unlimited.
Hi, it's Peter Sherman, and welcome to Sherman Unlimited. We have a special guest with us today, but before introducing him, let's try something. Imagine a movie script, and the main character is the last living author of Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the document that defines the Constitution of our country and notably our rights as Canadians. Leading those important talks over 40 years ago was Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau. The group succeeded, and at Canada's request, the British Parliament passed the Canada Act 1982, repatriating the Canadian Constitution, which took effect when Queen Elizabeth herself traveled to Canada to sign that incredibly important act of the British Parliament into law. Now, today, the only people alive who were party to what I've just described are Queen Elizabeth herself and that last living legislator, the Honorable Brian Peckford, who sat at the table as one of the authors, then as Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador. Now, in 2022, Premier Peckford, comfortably retired in British Columbia, takes center stage once again as he files suit against the Canadian government for violating the charter he helped author. The Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, is oddly the son of the very person who led those talks over 40 years ago. I want to welcome Premier Brian Peckford to Sherman Unlimited. What an honor to have you here, sir.
Thank you very, very much. And I must point out right off the top that Pierre Elliott Trudeau tried to impose his repatriation and charter on the people of Canada, and we fought him in the Supreme Court of Canada, and he lost. So when he came back to the table in November 1981 is when we were able to get that Constitution Act of 1982. So it was really the premiers of the provinces that in the end were the authors of what we have today.
So let me ask you this question. Does that sound like an interesting movie plot? Because it does to me.
Absolutely. And who would have thought? I mean, in my wildest dreams, sitting here in Parksville, Vancouver Island, British Columbia, in retirement, watching what was going on in our country, and then suddenly 14 governments in the country begin to violate our Constitution without any justification, all over a virus for which over 99% of the population recover, and less than 1% have a fatality situation, and those over 80. This is an unbelievable situation.
It is an unbelievable situation to, I think, everybody listening to us. And here I am talking to the one guy who can say, at the table, we talked about these things. And I think the main thing that is active here in the lawsuit that you're in the process of filing that allows the Canadian government to abrogate some of the rights and privileges that the Charter guarantees under very exceptional circumstances. This doesn't qualify.
Absolutely. I remember it well. And that was the whole reason for putting it in the Constitution rather than in a federal law or provincial law. So it was permanent, and only under the most extreme circumstances could it be abrogated. And that meant extreme circumstances like insurrection, war, or some other peril to the state. What we're in today is hardly any peril to the state, with 9% people recover and less than 1% fatality rate. So this is trying to put a round peg in a square hole, and the governments have succeeded so far with the compliant media and with a big pharma on their side to see our rights and freedoms taken away unjustifiably, and why there's so much opposition in Canada today.
So here you are in what most people describe as their retirement years. I'm not that far behind you. And you have suddenly become, I won't say an unwitting active player again, but I bet if we went back 2 years and somebody told you that you were going to take action against the Canadian government on a charter and the rights under that charter that you helped author, you would have said, you're crazy.
Absolutely. I would have tried to have them committed. I never thought in my wildest dreams this would happen. And what I've done is because I've been talking about this now for almost a year and a half, having public meetings, doing Zoom meetings all over the country and so on, I said to myself a couple of weeks ago with my wife, I said, what else can I do besides what I'm doing? And of course, the thing I can do is because I am, and all Canadians are affected by the travel ban, which is federal. Every Canadian now who's unvaccinated is not allowed aboard a plane, not allowed aboard a train, or not allowed to travel by any boat that's under federal jurisdiction. So here we have it. So therefore I have filed. It's now registered with the federal court, January the 31st. I filed a lawsuit with other Canadians against the federal government's travel ban because we're saying it's unconstitutional. It violates my right to travel. There's a Section 6 in the Charter which says every Canadian has the right to travel anywhere in Canada or leave Canada. How much clearer can you get than that? And so I've taken the next step. Rather than just talk the talk, I'm going to walk the walk on behalf of my other First Ministers who passed away and on behalf of a lot of Canadians who can't see their loved ones or conduct their business because of this unconstitutional travel ban.
Well, speaking as one of them, I say thank you, and I hope you win the suit. But let's get back a little bit on your action. When did you begin actually thinking about a formal challenge?
About 3 or 4 weeks ago, when I began to see other challenges that were happening in the provincial courts and some at the federal courts. But I realized that the one that would capture every single Canadian was the federal travel ban, because it affects every Canadian from British Columbia to Newfoundland, from from Nunavut in the north to Niagara in the south. And so when we finally, my lawyers and I decided upon the travel ban as the one to trigger the lawsuit, it was because of two things. One, it affects every single Canadian. They can't move if they're not vaccinated. And two, we get directly to a federal court rather than have to go through a provincial court first and then into the federal court system. So it will expedite the time for a final decision.
I found it interesting that you picked on the travel action, and I hear your explanation as to why, but it seems to me that there are many other charter rights that are touched, if not actually violated, by things that the federal government has done. And I'm going to tell you something that I think you probably already know, and I'll get your reaction to it. It seems that Justin Trudeau originally had said, and this is at the outset of the vaccination program, we're not a country that makes vaccination mandatory. So he's literally reversed himself. Was that a trigger that really bothered you? I would think it would be.
Well, yes, and then later on, just a week or so ago, he came out and he called anybody who wasn't vaccinated a racist, misogynist, right? We don't know whether they should be occupying the same space as those that are vaccinated. This is the Prime Minister of our country. This is the leader of our land saying those kinds of things about certain Canadians who have a different point of view about an experimental vaccine than he has. So there's no question. And in my lawsuit, by the way, there is mention of his direct statements as well. So they're very much a part of the lawsuit.
Good. Well, the fundamental freedoms of the Charter, I don't have to tell you, are freedom of conscience and freedom of religion, freedom of thought, freedom of belief, freedom of expression, and freedom of the press. And it seems to me that freedom of the press should include social media. And where I'm going with this is if I say something like, the vaccines don't perform as originally stated, and we had alternatives, YouTube or Facebook or Twitter, which is where most people now get their news, could shut me down. I know that's not the foundation of your lawsuit, but it seems to me that what you and your colleague premiers wrote in 1981-82 has been sidelined now. Is that a fair statement?
It is a very, very fair statement. And where is the freedom of the press when you can't express those very legitimate criticisms about what has happened, that there were lots of alternatives available for the governments to use rather than barter away our freedoms and rights. And by the way, if you go on, that was Section 2 you quote. If you go on to Section 6 of the Charter, you'll also find our right to life, liberty, and security of the person. And then Section 6 was mobility. Section 7 was life, liberty, and security of the person. Section 15 was every Canadian has the right to equality before the law. And then part of Section 2 also talks about the right, the freedom to assemble and associate. So all of those are at play in this lawsuit that I have. I highlight the travel ban, but we also highlight all of those sections of the Charter which are also in violation by what the Prime Minister and the governments of Canada are doing.
Well, there's one other really basic thing to me, and I'm sure that this plays into it as well. We have rights as individuals to decide to keep secret our personal information. That's security of the person. And that means medical included. So if that's the basis for legal action, the argument would be that the government's concern for citizens in a time of national emergency trumps our individual rights. But it doesn't hold true. I've already asked you that question and you've answered it. So since we're not in such a time, I'm entitled to say, I'm not telling you whether I'm vaccinated. Get on any plane, walk into any restaurant. Technically, is that the fight?
Yeah, exactly. And Section 8 of the Charter also says, by the way, right to privacy. So all the way to the bank. The other point that I should make is that not only does Section 1 not apply because we're not into a war, insurrection, or whatever, but if somebody wanted to argue, and we'll all be fair people, that it does apply, there are 4 tests in that section. You have to demonstrably justify what you're doing has more benefit than cost. You have to do it by law. You have to do it with reasonable limits, and by the way, they keep changing every day with new edicts, so there's no reasonable limits ever established. And number 4, all of those 3 tests have to be done within the context of a free and democratic society. That means a parliamentary democracy in Canada. That means the parliament should be open and would have had to debate these things before they became law, and the governments of Canada did not do that. So even if Section 1 did apply, they have failed the tests under which they could have applied Section 1.
Well, my statement, not yours. I don't believe that the current Prime Minister or his government have paid very much attention to that famous charter that you helped write. The baseline governance of Canada is founded on that. He's tossed it aside, as far as I'm concerned, in handling this pandemic. But that's just my opinion. What's yours?
Mine is exactly the same. And I tell you why, one of the reasons why. And it's become quite clear now in the last several weeks that Justin Trudeau went to the Economic Forum's School of Young Leadership. Christina Friedland, who's the Deputy Prime Minister, went to the World Economic School of Young Leadership. And the whole idea of that school is to diminish the role of the nation state and increase the role of world government and international organizations. President Macron went there. The government of California went there. The Prime Minister of New Zealand went there. So what we have is a group of leaders in the Western world who are not committed to their own countries, who are committed to seeing their nation state and sovereignty diminish, to be replaced by some kind of international organization. And there's a new clip that has just been exposed that Klaus, the guy who heads up the Economic Forum, talked about, and it's now circulating all through cyberspace, this 2-minute clip of his, which he said that they had captured the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, and over half his cabinet to believe in this new philosophy. What's going on? That's
Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum, yes. And you're talking about the Great Reset. You believe we're head and shoulders into it under Trudeau.
Well, there's no question about it. I mean, Klaus Schwab's own words are there for anybody to see. And the way Trudeau has been acting, and he's Deputy Prime Minister, in condemning people and dividing the country, that he's more in favor of seeing a more international governance system in the world than a national system in the world. In other words, the nation state becomes diminished and the international organizations get increasing power.
Well, if that's the case, Mr. Peckford, what it means is that the opposition leader unseated and an interim leader appointed, and us with the very same Prime Minister Trudeau running a minority government, should make all Canadians fearful of where we go next.
Exactly, and I just noticed that the province of Nova Scotia is now preventing people from protesting along a highway that leads to one of the borders to the United States. They're preventing people from protesting along the highway, not blocking the highway, from protesting along the highway, on the side of the highway. And that in Nova Scotia right now, outdoors, no more than 20 can get together. I mean, these are the kinds of measures that are relegated to governments of another age when they never had democracy. And that's where we're headed right now. And these are dangerous times. And Canadians and Americans need to stand up and make sure that we defend those rights and freedoms that are part of our constitutions.
Well, we've heard a lot lately about truckers and their protests and the push and shove going on in Ottawa, and talk about bringing in the army to remove these people. I think that the right to assemble is basic to the document that you helped author.
Absolutely. It's right there in Section 2, the freedom to assemble, and a second one, the freedom to associate. And so, they hear the governments this morning and the mayor of Ottawa talking, we might have to bring in the military because people are peacefully protesting. It's legitimate civil disobedience, which is allowed under the law. It just goes to demonstrate to you how far the governments have been able to propagandize the people against our own freedoms and our own rights. And this has to stop. And now is the time for us all to really physically stand up as well as to vocally stand up.
Well, the polls are saying right now that people in Canada are in majority tired of the restrictions on them. Premier Moe has already said he's dropping them in his province. And this is all owing to the pandemic, of course, and taking personal responsibility, it seems to me anyway, would be within our rights. And the government should stop holding us back, because this is what the Charter was all about. And I'm sure it plays a role here in your mind, and it's something that you're turning over in your mind right now. Am I correct?
Absolutely. And I have speeches tomorrow night, public meetings. I have a Zoom meeting, a town hall Zoom meeting tonight where I'm articulating these very things. We have to stand up, and our Charter and our being violated unnecessarily. And we cannot let this happen, because if we do, democracy is not worth a row of beans if we allow these kinds of incursions to happen and not arrest them and stop them from happening. And that's why my lawsuit is so important. We got to get to reestablish the Charter as the supreme law of Canada, which it says in the Constitution itself. It says the supreme law of Canada is the Constitution of Canada, and this supreme law now is being violated by all our governments, and we've got to reestablish it as the principles which guide us as a democratic nation. Okay,
Premier Peckford, last question. Where do things go from here?
I think our civil disobedience has to continue. We must ensure that it's civil, it's disobedient, that it's within the law. And I don't think we are going to see anytime soon our civil disobedience diminish. I think it's going to increase until the governments get the understanding that their propaganda is now starting to wane, and that the majority of people in the country understand that their fundamental rights are being violated unjustifiably, and therefore we need them back. And so I think over the next couple of weeks is going to be critical with this civil disobedience to get the governments to back down. Very cynically, Premier Moe of Saskatchewan said he's going to remove them, but guess what? In the next breath he said, in the not-too-distant future. How cynical is that? Rather than put a date on it or eliminate them completely right now. This is the kind of actions that our leaders are taking, which makes everybody so cynical, and why we're out on the streets and will continue to protest until the governments come to their senses and reestablish our rights and freedoms.
Well, I think one thing, I said that was the last question, but I'll get you to refine that. It seems to me that people have to remember that the Charter which you helped author and the Charter of which you are the last living author is not just a supreme document for Canada. It governs how we are governed at the federal, at the provincial and municipal levels, correct?
Absolutely. It's over all the other laws. And same way in the United States, the Bill of Rights is a foundational document that came into existence in 1791. That's how long ago the Americans have had a Bill of Rights. Our Bill of Rights we never got until 1982, and I can tell you right now, there's a lot of Canadians like me have no intention of seeing it going down the drain in 40 years.
God bless you. The Honorable Brian Peckford, former Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador and last living author of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Peter. I appreciate it, and have a wonderful day.
Well, there's a guy who tells it like it is to him. Difference between Brian Peckford and anyone else is he's not just offering his opinion. That opinion is founded on experience. 10 years of Premier and the opportunity to speak in the first person as the only remaining participant in the authoring of Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Yes, he was there, so he knows what he helped write, what it means in spirit, and what it means in letter. We'd best hear his words and make sure the current government of Canada does too. Find future episodes wherever you find your favorite podcasts or by visiting SHURMANUNLIMITED.com. So if you like what you heard, tell a friend. If you really liked it, tell 3 friends. If you really hated it, tell 3 enemies. We'll talk again soon.